Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Big Ideas Night Job Search with Porter Broswell, Katherine Brooks, Steve Dalton, Kirk Snyder, and moderated by Antonio Neves. We are so excited for tonight's conversation on a topic that is so important right now, the job search. Please connect with other readers and guests using the chat function. We'd love to hear your thoughts, what you're reading, and how you're taking care of yourself during this difficult time. We just ask that everyone please stay respectful in the chat. Random House has enabled auto-generated closed captions for this evening's event. To access the closed captions, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen. Please bear with us. These captions are auto-generated, so they may not be 100% accurate, but we will do our best. Random House will also be providing the links to each of our authors' books that are currently for sale or available for pre-order in the chat. This event will be posted on YouTube, and we will send that link out to all guests in case you would like to rewatch or share with your friends and family. Now on to more important things. I am thrilled to introduce our moderator for this evening, Antonio Neves. Antonio is the author of 4 books, including Stop Living on Autopilot, Take Responsibility for Your Life, and Rediscover a Bolder, Happier You by Rodale Books. On his podcast, The Best Thing, Antonio talks with leaders about the best thing to happen to them that would never appear on a resume. Antonio's speaking audiences over the years have included Google, Amazon, Starwood Hotels and Resorts Worldwide, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, Booking.com, Credit Union National Association, Stanford University, and scores more. For over 10 years, Antonio worked as a correspondent in New York City with top television networks, including NBC, PBS, and BET networks. Antonio is a graduate of Western Michigan University and holds a master's degree from Columbia University. And now, may I present Antonio Neves and Big Ideas Night Job Search.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Antonio Neves here, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. It is my honor, it is my pleasure to be with you this evening to talk about an extremely important topic, the job search. I know this is something that has been on so many people's mind throughout, as mentioned previously, an extremely challenging time. But I want you to know that if you are unemployed right now, if you are looking for a job, maybe even you have a job, but you're looking to change jobs, that right now you are exactly in the right place, because we have some amazing panelists. They're going to share some amazing information with you. Hey, something I want to remind you to do is that this event is for you. So we want to hear from you. If you have questions, make sure you put them right there in the comments, and we're going to do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Make sure they are short, make sure they are succinct and to the point, so we can get some great answers for you. I'm going to do my best to get to those as fast as I can. But okay, enough about me. Let me introduce our panelists so we can get this conversation going. First and foremost, then we're going in alphabetical order. Joining us is Porter Broswell. He is the CEO and co-founder of JobWell, the leading career advancement platform for Black, Latinx, and Native American students and professionals. Additionally, Porter is the host of Race at Work with Porter Broswell, and author of Let Them See You, an amazing book. And he has received many awards and recognitions from major publications, including Inc. Magazine's 30 Under 30, Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, and most recently, LinkedIn's 2020 Top Voices. Let's welcome from New York City, Porter Broswell. Thank you for joining us, Porter. Next up, joining us from Nashville, Tennessee is Katherine Brooks. She is an award-winning career counselor, consultant, and writer who has directed career centers at Vanderbilt University, Wake Forest University, the University of Texas at Austin, and Dickinson College. A nationally certified counselor and board certified coach, she has worked with thousands of job seekers and writes the Career Transitions blog for Psychology Today. Katherine, welcome so much. Next up, we have Steve Dalton. Steve is an author and program director and senior career consultant at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. He is also the founder of corporate training firm Contact a Colleague, and he's author of the amazing forthcoming book, The Job Closer. And last but not least, joining me here in a different location, but in Southern California in Los Angeles, is award-winning business communication professor at the University of Southern California, a critically acclaimed author and Fortune 500 speaker. He teaches in both undergraduate and graduate programs in communication, culture, and the contemporary workplace. Kirk Snyder is joining us. So thank you, everyone. I'm fired up. You hear me? I sound like I'm on the radio. I'm so excited to have all of you here tonight. What I want to do right now is just give you all the opportunity just to introduce yourselves and tell the audiences a little bit about yourself, your work, and your book. I'm going to invite you to be brief so we can get to the Q&A. But Dr. Brooks, Katherine, let's start with you.
Well, thanks very much, Antonio. I'm glad to be here. I've been in career services for about 30 years now, and it's really been one of the best experiences one could have in a career because you get to help so many people with their careers. And my books are What Colors Your Parachute series that I have been so honored to co-author with Richard Bowles, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but his spirit remains in these wonderful best-selling books. And so great pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you so much. And by the way, this is one of the books right here, the Job Hunter's Workbook. It's amazing. Porter, let's go over to New York City. Tell us a little bit about you and your work, please.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Porter Braswell, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Jopwell. And basically, my entire life's work revolves around connecting underrepresented communities with professional opportunities. And my book, Let Them See You, was a conversation that I was having at scale to underrepresented communities, folks of color, to explain to them what you're going to face as a person of color in the workplace. But I would say more importantly, it's also it's a vehicle for the majority culture, those that are not folks of color, to listen in on that intimate mentoring conversation that the community has so often, so that they can help create the structures where folks of color can thrive. And so, whether it's my book or the company that I've built or my podcast, my life's work revolves around the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I love that. Thank you so much. And here's his book right here. It's a fantastic read, everyone. We're going to skip over to Steve Dalton in North Carolina. Steve, I got some exciting news. This book is not available yet, everyone, but I got an early copy of The Job Closer. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
I'm very passionate about democratizing the search. I think there's so much information, it's easy to get overwhelmed out there. But I came up through the ranks of chemical engineering and strategy consulting and marketing before I became a career coach about 15 years ago. And so I've really learned to appreciate the value of process. If you want to learn how to cook, you don't ask for lists of ingredients, you ask for recipes. So I've really made it, leveraged my past to bring as many recipes to job seekers as possible. The Job Closer is a collection of those recipes, and I'm excited to talk about those today.
I like that. And last but not least, I love this book right here, Finding Work You Love by Kirk Snyder. Kirk, tell us about you and your work. I know we learned a little bit about you in her introduction, but I really love this book.
Thank you, Antonio. It's so great to be here this evening with everyone. And I'm a professor of business communication at the University of Southern California. And the new academic year, I'll step into the department chair role for USC's business communication department at the Marshall School of Business. The world of work, the changing world of work, career development is my career focus. It's my research specialty. And at USC, I developed a system over the years that has evolved into a required career course for all MBA students. And it's based on what I call the Working You system. And simply what that means, Working You means you are being rewarded for the unique value you bring to the world of work. And so the book is all about how to achieve that in your own life, connecting who you are with what you do in that most personal and rewarding way. So I was excited to have the opportunity, this is my third book, to put this out for everyone to access it, and not just my beloved Trojans at USC.
Fantastic. And if you guys thought that I wasn't going to hold my own book up tonight, you were wrong. Here, Stop Living on Autopilot. I had to do it. What we're going to do right now is start really big picture, and then we'll get a little bit more micro as we get deeper into the conversation. And let's stay with you, Kirk, for a quick moment. You know, so much has changed over the course of the pandemic, right? And so much has changed in the job market and how we go about getting hired. So what would you say, Kirk, is the biggest difference of how the job search process has changed pre-pandemic and where we are right now? I can't even believe I'm about to say this in April 2021.
That's a great question. I think a couple of things. One, I think it's become much more focused. And I think the realities of the world of work relative to sectors expanding, sectors being born that never existed before, and others that are going away. I think the focus has increased. I also will say that I think the forced isolation has been a little conducive to people being more introspective. And I've seen this in the people that I work with and my own students. There's a greater sense of self-awareness around talents, around what's really going to create value for me. So I think there's been a shift from external focus to what I see as some more internal focus criteria, which I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, and I agree. Focus has probably changed a lot for a lot of people. They had to zero in. Steve, I'd like to come to you. You mentioned earlier about how recipes are a critical part of your book. My hunch is that the recipes to getting a job prior to the pandemic and the recipes now have been shaked and baked, forgive me, a little bit because of so much has changed. What's your perspective with the same question, how things have changed?
You'd think that it would be seismically different, but the 2-Hour Job Search, which is my first book, was developed during the 2008 financial crisis because it was a lot harder to find jobs. There was an uncertain economy. A lot of people were getting laid off. Sounds kind of familiar to what we're going through today. But people were so shaken. They had the ability to follow instructions, but not the ability to curate tips into an actionable format. So they were just getting overwhelmed. Every article sounded great. All of the information sounded great, but what are your marching orders that you take from that? So largely, I think it's a return to the future. We're back to the 2008 financial crisis. And the good news, I think it actually is a good time to be looking for a job because those that embrace an advocacy-based search, basically where you focus your time turning strangers into advocates at the organizations you want to work at, rather than that same amount of time applying online where you kind of know you're never going to hear back, but you kind of don't know what else to do, so you do it anyway. The people who form relationships over time efficiently and effectively will outperform the rest of their competition even more so than they would have last year when companies were hiring so fast that even blind applicants could get the job.
Yeah, that relationship building is absolutely key. I want to come to you, Porter, because you're in a pretty unique position as an entrepreneur. And over the past year, you got to see things probably in a really different way. Not only are you seeing the changes that have happened with candidates and the folks that come to your website and to JobWell, but also probably with employers as well. So I'm just curious, what types of shifts, changes have you seen in the past year with the data that you see every single day?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've seen from organizations that resonate more with job seekers is that you have to stand for something. You can't be a silent brand in the climate that we live in. If you don't have a perspective or a very strong, point of view on what's going on in this country, then that silence is louder than taking a stand. And so one of the things that we've seen over the last year is our companies' willingness to engage in dialogues that they historically have shied away from. And I think that's a great evolution. And those companies that can authentically stand for something that resonates with what they do, they are the most attractive employers right now.
Yeah, I hope that's a conversation that we can get into a little bit deeper. You're right. There are things and there are tweets that have gone out, messages that have gone out that I never would have thought a major brand would share. So there's been major shifts and positive shifts that have taken place. Katherine, I want to come to you, and I'm just looking at your book right here, Job Hunter's Workbook. My hunch is that this was written prior to the pandemic in your work. So I'm curious, even with so much that has happened, my hunch is many of the tried and true things in here are still working today, right? Even with so many things that have changed.
Yeah, well, following up kind of on what Steve said, so much of the career guidance that we can give is kind of evergreen. It's going to fit in a lot of different markets. You just shift a little bit in how you manage it. For instance, right now, one of the things you would want to emphasize would be video interviews. You know, people who are used to doing in-person interviews might not really be comfortable with a Zoom interview. And so that's a new skill they're going to have for this environment. But you know, you just sort of make these adjustments as needed, depending on what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering that question. Again, I want to stay a little bit big picture for a second. Some questions are already coming in right now for all of you. So thank you to everyone for your questions. We're going to get to as many of those as possible. So of course, you know, there's a lot of changes, right? But also, how would you say candidates, whether this is a person that's about to graduate from college or even someone who's mid-career, are looking at work now? I know, Kirk, you talk a lot about this, you know, finding work that you're truly passionate about, that you love. You know, a lot of the literature I'm reading, it seems like there's been a shift in people and how they're looking at work now. People are leaving, no longer as much staying in the bigger cities. They can do remote work, they can live somewhere else. Do you find that there's a bifurcation, if you will, between the folks that are still looking at their work to be their everything, and other folks are just like, you know what, this is just going to be my 9 to 5, and I'll do other things in the evenings and weekends?
Right, that's a good question. I mean, I think some of that story is still to be told and to be determined. What I do think is that there's a shift that is happening where people are recognizing that work doesn't have to be something I have to endure. What my book is really all about is intrinsic motivation. When I do research-based studies and examine people who identify that they love their job and high levels of satisfaction, there's also a much higher level of career trajectory, higher salaries, people are being recruited by other companies. And that's not just by happenstance, there's a real reason. And when you are connected to what you do, and again, working you means that you're rewarded for who you are by the job. When that's happening, you're on your A game. So yes, you're going to get promoted. Yes, you're going to make more money. And it's not something that you get a pit in your stomach thinking about the night before you go to sleep on Sunday night. So I think the recognition of how important it is to create this sense of personalization, and this is for absolutely every single human being. I believe everyone deserves a job they love and not something that they have to suffer through. And that is all rooted back in identifying and recognizing the value that you alone, and we all have that value that we bring as human beings relative to talents and skills, who we want to be in the world, and how we can connect that in the 21st century, regardless of a challenging job market or a flourishing job market. That basic premise, I believe, should be the same.
Thank you. And by the way, for the panelists, if you want to jump in at any time, please do. I'm going to do my best to say your names prior to asking you a question, but if you're just feeling what someone said, please jump in. Porter, I want to come to you after what Kirk said, because you said something that really stood out to me as you're introducing your work. And you said my life's work. And I can't tell you how few people I've ever heard relate to their work as their life's work. And that really touched me in a powerful way, in the way that I'm going to look at my work moving forward as well. So to follow up on the question that Kirk just answered, do you find that candidates are looking at work a little bit differently than they did prior to the pandemic?
Well, so everybody's path to being able to kind of figure out what they're meant to do is a different path. For me, I started my career buying and selling currencies at Goldman Sachs, and I really enjoyed my job. I thought I was, good at my job, but I had a tragic thing happen to my family where my cousin passed away, where he had an accident where he fell off a mountain, and it was the first time that somebody so close to me passed, and that really kind of woke me up to realize that life can end, and it can end quickly. And he was in his early 30s and I was in my mid 20s. And that was a catalyst that forced me to take a step back and really recognize and think through, what am I doing? Like, what am I meant to do on this planet? And through a variety of different ways of getting to the ultimate conclusion that I'm meant to do what I'm currently doing, I've never looked at what I do as a job. I'm so passionate about the topics that I engage in and the work that I get to do. I feel I'm incredibly blessed to be able to do it. And as an outcome, amazing things have happened. And so it definitely resonates with me, that ability to align your passions with your work. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing that has changed during the past year that we've lived in, and it's a bit sad, I think, is that there was a huge desire and demand to break into tech and to work at startups and to go to these young, innovative companies that are disrupting things. And then all of a sudden when COVID hit, it was a flight back to Fortune 1000 companies with the safety nets and thinking that that's, the ultimate safety and the place that you can go where you don't have to, you won't necessarily experience the type of layoffs that a lot of startups went through. And I think it's sad because you're making decisions, rightly so, where you're thinking about safety, but that may not align with what you're meant to do. And so I hope we get back to a world where people are thinking about what they're meant to do and called to do, because that's, I think, how the world progresses over time.
Beautiful answer. And Catherine and Steve, I want to come to you next, and we'll start with you, Catherine. I mean, you're interacting with students on a daily basis, as are you, Kirk, as are you, Steve. I'm curious from your perspective, Catherine, and then to you, Steve, as Porter just mentioned, people finding work that they're meant to do. The folks that come into your offices, that you have conversations with, phone calls with, Zooms, whatever you use, are folks looking for work that they're meant to do, or are you still finding folks are, no, I just need a job. I got to start paying off these student loans?
Right. Well, I think, the researcher Amy Resniewski has this classification of job, career, and calling, where she sort of itemizes which approach are you taking. And certainly there are students who see it as a job. I need a job. I need the paycheck. But they're quite often, once you get past that initial kind of anxiety or fear about the job market, you do start to get at what would I really enjoy doing? What would be something that has meaning for me? We often talk to our students about, who do you want to work with? What do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? And then the most important question, why? What is the why in this? Tell me what motivates you. And that's a great question because we can start to tease out, are they really interested in this? Or is it a function of a parent decision? Or is it the function of something they've been told they should do because of what classes they have done well in?
Thank you. And Steve, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I'd just like to echo back to what Porter said. I think, about the importance of really being engaged in the work that you do. I think the only real job security is excellence at whatever you do. And I think that's a common mistake I see job seekers make right now. They go for any job. They're convinced they will never have another job again in their lives, which is false. But they take that job that's just something to ease that, quiet that anxiety temporarily, that they'll never be employed again. And then they struggle with it because it wasn't really what they wanted to do. And then they put out mediocre work. They're not getting better at it every day because they're not mentally engaged. And then they find themselves back in a job search, except on the other end of a crushing failure, where they just couldn't hack it. And I don't wish that on anybody. There's a great study by Brown, Setron, and Topa that found that for every one person that was hired through an online job posting application, 12 were hired through internal referrals. And that just speaks to the importance of being able to fill strangers with confidence that you can do the job. And the way that you do that is you care about the conversations you're having with them. You have genuine curiosity. If you have curiosity, that will lead to job leads. If you seek job leads, you will get neither learning nor job leads out of it. So I think getting students to really focus on what do you learn easily about, what do you get better at every day without even trying, try to find a way to get paid for that. And that will set your career up on the right note.
Great, thank you. As you were talking, Steve, it made me think about me getting that first. I got that good job after college that everyone talks about. You got to get that good job. And I remember that good job just had me miserable. That good job as a sales representative responsible for 25 grocery stores. That's for another panel. Catherine, I want to come to you, and I want to get a little bit more, start getting a little bit more concrete. And though we can talk about resumes and we can talk about LinkedIn and we can get more concrete there if we want. And I see a few questions have already come in for that, but I want to talk about stories. And this is something Porter talks about in his book, that Kirk talks about in his book as well, you too, Steve. But I want to start with you, Catherine, on why stories are so important in the job search process and how those connect to our resumes and and LinkedIn profiles?
Sure. Well, as human beings, we're just wired for stories. That's, it's why we love movies and TV and podcasts and all of that, because we recognize the value of stories. It gives meaning to us. And so when you use a story in an interview setting, or you tell a story through your LinkedIn profile, what you're doing is you're presenting yourself, and you're giving stories that will be memorable, that after the interview's over, they might not remember everything you said, but they'll probably remember that story that you told. And it becomes a way to illustrate what skills you have, what personality traits you have, what's important to you by the type of story that you tell. So if you just say, I'm hardworking, well, great, who's going to say in an interview, I'm lazy. But if you say, I'm hardworking, and let me tell you about this summer when I had, 2 jobs and was taking a class and was doing these other things, now you've got a picture of that person as a hard worker.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, Kirk. I mean, in your book, you talk about how important, quote unquote, image is. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to who do we want to be in the world? And again, thinking about intrinsic motivation. And that has absolutely everything to do with how you're telling your story in a job interview. So, to an extent, it all goes back to Aristotle, ethos, logos, and pathos. What ultimately is going to move someone to say, yes, that's the person that stood out in terms of the candidates, it's because you pulled some emotional trigger. And if you are authentically connected to the why of that organization and you want to be part of it, and I think a great deal of that is connected back to who do I want to be in the world, and how is this job helping me be who I want to be in the world, where I'm proud to tell people what I do, proud to tell people where I work. As soon as that happens, that's the juxtaposition from I'm not just doing this for an external reason, I'm doing it for an internal reason. And that's where intrinsic motivation is born. And your story, if you are applying to the right job because the fit between who you are and what you do is there, you're going to be empowered to tell that right story that's going to pull that pathos trigger for that interviewer that will set you above everyone else and get you the job.
Absolutely. And Porter, you spend a decent amount of time in your book talking about personal brand building and how important that is. For you, is personal brand building, is that imperative to incorporate part of your story, or you look at it maybe a little bit different way with personal branding?
Well, I think about internally, and if you want to get promoted, and if an organization wants to retain you, I think the personal branding is what that individual can do. And I think the retention part comes around building cultures where people feel like they belong. And I think it's no longer up for debate if diversity is good for corporate America. I think that's been an argument that's been settled. But the power of diversity only gets unlocked if people feel like they can bring their authentic self to work. And the power of diversity, of course, is sharing your perspectives and your experiences and the context that you have coming into that dialogue, so you can look at problems and challenges in different ways. And if a room full of people feel like they can do that, then the best solutions are going to come to the table, and you're going to have the best products, and you're going to go out and get clients, and you're going to win. So that's the power of diversity. But a large part of that is bringing your experiences. So how do you, as a personal brand, how do you share your experiences and the time and place and how you do it, and the types of stories that you're choosing to share? You have to be aware enough to know your audience. And so I think the personal brand side of things, plus building a culture where people feel like they can bring their authentic self, it's all one thing. And if you can find that, I don't know, that right book where it all kind of aligns, then that's where you find success, you get promoted, the company gets to retain you, and it's what we all look for.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Finding that place where you can bring your full self to work and you don't have to hide these certain parts of you. And listen, I know firsthand what it was like early in my career when all of me didn't show up for a variety of reasons, some personal, some external. So I appreciate you sharing that. And Steve, this goes along the lines of talking about the brand, talking about using stories to truly stand out. But I know there's that person right now that's overwhelmed. They're at home. They're not able to go to job interviews in person like they used to, or maybe they actually used to shine. They're not able to bump elbows with people at networking events where they build those relationships, where they get referrals, et cetera. It seems to me that informational meetings aren't happening as much as they used to via Zoom as they did in person. So I'm going to ask you a real big question, and maybe you can give us a recipe from your book. If someone's looking to stand out in 2021 amidst all of the distractions, what do you invite that person to do?
Listen, honestly, short answer is just listen. I think I've heard that pushback, like, oh, how I would be imposing on people during a pandemic to ask for an informational meeting. But what the last year has taught us is that we need to feel heard more now than we ever have before. We're all feeling isolated and unappreciated. At many of our organizations, people have been laid off, and those that remain take up their work and don't get a raise. They just have more work all of a sudden. And people will say thank you, but they won't show thank you. And people don't get that chance to reflect on all they've done. They're just trying to keep the ship afloat. So I do honestly think that is the best gift a job seeker could give a professional, someone whose work you admire, who works at an organization you admire. Reach out to them, ask them if they'd be willing to give you the gift of their time, and ask them how they got so good at their job. Why are you so good at it? What did you learn from this? And then just deeply listen. Don't sell yourself. Don't have an agenda. Just listen really well. Olivia Fox Cabana wrote a wonderful book called The Charisma Myth, where she found that the single biggest predictor of whether you're perceived to be likable is nothing that you actually say. It's how well you're perceived to be listening by your audience. So, but I get it. It's a tough paradigm switch when you've been told your whole life to sell yourself, to put yourself out there. And I'm saying something exactly the opposite. Put yourself out there, but then listen. These people that you're reaching out to are experts compared to you who are trying to build knowledge. Let them talk about why they're so good at their job. It might be the only time they get to talk positively about themselves in the last 3 months, and they will remember that feeling.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
If I could jump in. Oh, sorry, Antonio, go for it.
Please, Porter.
I was going to say one of the things I love Steve, I love how simple that is. Listen, one of the things that stands out to me, we've at Jopwell, we've been scaling and we're approaching about 100 employees. And one of the things that's so interesting for me that stands out when folks come across my desk is, are you kind? If you're kind and you're just a nice person to be around, especially during that interview process, kindness goes so far. And just a simple smile and starting off a conversation. One of the things that really disarms me as like the final round interview is just asking, how's your day going? It's like a basic question to ask somebody that really breaks the ice, goes such a far way.
Thank you for adding that. And what I want to do right now, we're going to do some rapid fire questions from the panel. I have a lot more questions for you, but I want to get to some of the questions that are here already. So I'll pick one person to answer. Doesn't need to be a long answer, but answer as you choose. So get ready for some rapid fire questions, panelists. I'm coming to Katherine Brooks right now. Big question. Does your education necessarily need to line up with your job?
Absolutely not. There are some fields where, sure, I would like my attorney to have gone to law school. So there are certain fields where there needs to be some alignment. But aside from that, it's really about the major. It isn't what are you going to do with that major? It's what do you want to do? And how can we show whatever education you have, it can be a part of what it is that you want to do. If you want to become a broadcast journalist, for example, you're going to approach it different if you're a history major or an English major or a psychology major or a business major. You're going to come in with that mindset, that perspective. And so, no, you do not need to have a linear path between that major and the job.
I love it. I think a lot of people just had a big sigh that just came out and said it's okay. We're going to stick with some rapid fire questions with some questions from the audience right now. Steve, I'm coming to you. Buckle up, get ready. Since you already touched on this a little bit, I think you can continue on. What advice do you have for soon-to-be college graduates interested in networking during a pandemic?
First off, forgive yourself if you feel any anxiety about this. You've never been trained to do this. And how can you be expected to know how to do something you've never been trained for? I do think the media does a good job of making job seekers feel bad about their own plight, but it's not core curriculum at most schools, which to me is unconscionable. And I hope that changes in the coming decades. So first, feel no shame. You're picking up a violin for the first time. It's going to sound awful. But my second recommendation would be find a recipe that you trust, find a book that resonates with you, or a set of instructions or an article where you're like, that sounds feasible, that sounds like my style, and execute that recipe. See if it works for you. If you like it, keep doing it. If you don't like it, try to find another recipe, but you don't have to build this from scratch on your own. There are lots of smart people out there who have curated approaches for you. So to summarize, don't feel bad if this feels overwhelming. And second, don't try to create something from scratch. Try to borrow a process that seems to work well for others.
I love that these two answers not only put, I'm sure, the audience at ease, but they're putting me at ease as well. Like I took a deep breath. We're gonna continue on with this lightning round. We got a question for Kirk coming in right now. I'm choosing you, Kirk. This is an interesting one. Any advice or tips you have for a person? This is a really relevant one. I think this is important that we don't talk about enough. Any advice, tips for a person returning to a job seeking after an employment gap, like 10 plus years? And of course, I know you'd like to know what were they doing during those 10 years. We don't have that information, but what would you advise that person?
I mean, I would advise that person the same thing that I would advise anyone. You want to make sure that you are appreciating and valuing who you are, what's important to you, having that self-efficacy, and then thinking about what jobs are going to reward that. So I think regardless of what the reason was for that gap, you don't want to ignore it. I think there's some practical things. You might want to do a functional versus a chronological resume. But I think making sure that that fit is there and that this is something that you're intrinsically motivated to do ultimately has the power to overcome what I think historically might be seen as something that could work against you. I think you always want to tell the truth. And I think embracing that, bringing that part of the gap into your story, whatever the reason might be, and just thinking about how that basic fit is why you are the best candidate for the job, even if there is a gap in employment. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. It's part of who you are, and who you are is valuable.
Thank you for sharing that. We're going to do one more question in the lightning round. Porter, I hope you're ready. There's a lot of money on this one right here. Get ready. And this is actually a good one for you, Porter, because I only mentioned a few of the awards that you've received. You're in the press quite often for a variety of really cool things. So I'm guessing this happens to you a lot. This is a great question. Porter, what's your advice for cold messaging people, maybe with a university connection on LinkedIn? And I'm curious what you're going to say.
On LinkedIn. I think short, to the point, with a very specific ask, and a time that would work well, or several times that would work well on your end. Basically, just make it as easy as possible for that person to say yes, and make it awkward for them to say no. And I think if you write a well-crafted letter or outreach that's short, to the point, and it's kind in tone, and you do some level of, what I'm trying to get out of the dialogue, it's really hard for somebody to say no. It's like, I'm not going to curse, but you're something if you say no to somebody like that. And so you make it hard for somebody to tell you no.
That's great. Short, to the point, be clear about what you're asking. And my 2 cents, don't ask to pick somebody's brain. Be very clear with what you want to do during that time. Because this lightning round is so much fun, I'm enjoying it. We're going to come back to you, Katherine, before we get to some of my questions. But we talked about stories a little bit earlier, Katherine, and you gave some examples. But this is a great question that someone has. Any tips? And I'd love, and after Katherine answers, I'll open this up for other folks if you want to jump in. Any tips on identifying stories or resources you would recommend for telling your story? And of course, a lot of these books will do that, but tips on identifying your stories.
Well, I think one good question is, what are you most proud of? Think back through your life. Where have you had some real peak experiences? What are some interesting experiences? What are the stories you've told in the past that people find interesting and relevant? It's got to be relevant to the job. You need to make sure, if you're in an interview setting, the story you're telling has relevance to the position that you're going to do. But I think about even humorous things you've overcome, and maybe you had a good laugh about it later. Those have potential to be stories. I had a candidate for a coaching position one time tell me a story about when he was a senior in college. He had to drive his car from Texas to California to get a job, and it was not a very good car, and his door fell off. The passenger door fell off at some point, and he literally duct taped it back on and made it to California. And ultimately, that was the great story, because if I'm going to hire someone to be a career coach to students, what a great story to tell students about tenacity and just doing what needs to be done to get the job. So stories can be so memorable that way.
I'm going to remember that story for the rest of my life. By the way, has anyone here ever found themselves like telling a story as if it happened to them, and then you realize it happened to somebody else and you borrowed their story? Maybe that's just me. Let's move on with some questions. A lot of people right now, I'm going to go two-pronged with this. First and foremost, I'm going to open this up to anyone on the panel. They're just like, I just want to get an interview. Antonio, I'm pressing submit on different websites, and my people are getting my resumes. There's very little human connection that's taking place. How can I ensure my resume is getting seen and I can get the interview? So any top line recommendations / suggestions for folks to get the interview? And let's say the resume is a good resume.
I'll jump in here. I think it goes back to the most important thing is networking. I mean, in addition to doing all the right things, you could be the most qualified person on paper, but I think you want to go that extra step. And the more you can do information interviews, the more you can leverage technology, which we've got, LinkedIn, for example, at our hands that we didn't have before, the more we can create some personal inroads and connections, not only enlighten ourselves about what they're really looking for and is this the right place for me to go, but also that's such an enormous gateway to get in there. So my advice is don't rely on just hitting send in terms of your resume. Go that extra mile and do your very best to make some personal connections with folks that are in that company.
Absolutely. And I would say also the power of follow-up is absolutely key as well for folks. Let's go here with this question. So let's say you got the job interview, and we're in new times right now. I mean, I'm sure folks can still remember getting dressed up nice to go to an office to have that job interview and to do your best to convey the value that you bring to the table. And now folks are doing these interviews at home, right? They're closing a door, maybe in a closet, hoping to get some quiet from the distractions. I know you can probably Google this, but I think it'd be great to hear from you. And maybe I'll come to you, Steve, and just any suggestions, tips. We touched on this earlier for nailing that interview that's on video. Because of course it's a different dynamic. You have weird pauses, people talk over each other. You think they're done talking, like me, then I keep talking, right? Because I talk too much. But any suggestions you have, Steve?
I think Frieder and Van Eideker did a great study where they found that 60% of interviews are decided within the first 15 minutes. And what happens in the first 15 minutes? There's small talk at the beginning. There's tell me about yourself. And then there's why do you want to work for this company? Why do you want this job? Why do you want to work in this sector? That's the first 15 minutes in most interviews. I think a lot of people stress about the latter part of the interviews, but there's something called confirmation bias, where we tend to make up our minds pretty quickly about things. And then we ignore facts that disagree with our first impressions and just focus on data that confirms what we already believe. So I really emphasize winning that first 15 minutes, being comfortable with small talk, even though it's not your jam, it's more about listening. So getting out of that, I need to impress them with a funny, witty anecdote, and instead focusing on just getting them to open up to you and really listening deeply. The visual aspect of it, to me, I find very helpful. I think it's easier. You can read cues. You can see when people take themselves on or off mute to know when to speak. So I would take a Zoom call over a phone call any day. But I do recommend managing your environment. Find a plain wall to back up against so there's no distractions. But really, I always recommend standing when you're on video. You can project your voice better. Make sure it's well lit. A lot of things that may seem intuitive, but don't occur to you until you make that mistake once. But really, I think the key to interviewing in the Zoom era is the same as interviewing in the pre-Zoom era, which is win that first 15 minutes. Have what I call the big four. Tell me about yourself, why this company, sector, and industry, and role. Be ready and confident with your answers for those 4 questions.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? I'm sure many of you have had so many meetings via video. Maybe you've interviewed folks. Porter, I'm guessing you probably. Let's go to you, Porter. My hunch is you've interviewed a lot of people and folks on your team. Tell us what folks get wrong. And Steve shared some awesome things to do. What have you seen that folks get wrong when it comes to the video interview?
Well, it's actually less about it's actually less about the video because everybody's circumstance is different, right? And it's an unfair thing to judge somebody on in terms of the quality of the light and the backdrop, but those things do come into play. But I think there are still things, whether it's in person or virtual, that still resonate. And so, Steve, I chuckle because the first 2 minutes I have the bias. It definitely kicks in. It's like I feel it. It's a feeling, and so I have to check my bias at the door because that's not the way it should be, and it's a constant fight. But it is true, and it's important to recognize and to acknowledge it. So you should win those first few minutes. But one of the things that is like a kind of scratch on the wall for me is at the end of the interview, if I ask somebody, do you have any questions? And the person's like, everything's been answered, then it just is a little bit of a letdown for me. And it's not even that I really want to answer a lot of the questions, but it just shows that you're curious and that, you have the time with me, you get to learn about the company. If you really want to be here, you should never really run out of questions. Antonio, you're doing a fabulous job asking us all questions. Like, you can come prepared and make sure you have questions. And so that's the one thing. And sometimes people will be friendly to you and tell you, listen, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions, but if you don't, it's all good. It's not all good. Ask a question. I think that's really important.
Yes, not all good. Let's remind some people, and I think in pretty much all of your books, and specifically I want to say in yours, Steve, you have some great examples of what those look like, and I believe Katherine, yours as well. And I want to come to you for this briefly, Kirk. Something you write about in your book is being able to define your unique value. How do you suggest, once people have defined that, how do you, makes me think about your unique selling proposition as well. How do you suggest people get that across in that job interview? This can be in person or video, but sometimes that interview is going to be 10 minutes. If you're lucky, maybe it goes longer, but how do folks ensure they get that across before that interview is over?
Right. I mean, I think that's the fundamental tenet of how you answer that question. Tell me about yourself. I think that is where you convey who you are, your human value, your functional value, talents and skills, that image value that we talked about, how that is perfectly aligned with who that company is. The more you can believe in who you are and believe that you have value, and every single person listening here tonight has value in the world of work, the more we can wrap our arms around that and identify it, let that lead us to not just the employers that are going to be a right fit employer, but also let that lead us in that interview. Because whether it's coming back to a question about our abilities, whether it's about why we want to work there, those fundamental anchors are there in those 3 value points that I talk about in Finding Work You Love. That's part of the Working You system. So the more we can recognize that, we have all of the answers that we need in a job interview to authentically connect in that way that will not just get us noticed, but will provide the right answers that that employer is looking for, because they're real, they're authentic.
The real authentic. Thank you for that. And panelists, we have about 10 minutes to go or so, and I want to get to a few more things. And Katherine, we're about to make a really harsh transition from that, but I know we all are talented. We can make these harsh transitions. I want to talk about negotiating because we're in a new place right now. There used to be a day and time you'd show up and you get the job offer, and maybe you're playing with this $10,000 range of negotiating. But now negotiating has changed. It's now like, okay, now I want 3 days in the office and 2 at home. Or if I accept $5,000 less, can I live in Bora Bora and only work remote? So where are we at with negotiating right now? I'm sure employers have expectations, but now folks, they've been at home, a lot of people, and they have expectations as well. So I'm guessing it's just not about dollars and cents anymore when it comes to negotiating.
Right. Well, and that's why it has to come back to you. What do you need? What is important to you? So you have to start with that. of, do I need flexibility during the week because of childcare, because of other things that are going on? Or do I need a particular salary? And what is that salary that I need? And of course, you can't approach the employer that way. You have to approach them from the value that you're bringing and why you will be worth that salary. But the idea is that it isn't just about money. And that's so important. That's what you brought up there, Antonio, in your question. It's beyond that. It's what are the benefits? What is the lifestyle that I get? What are other aspects of this position beyond and above just the money?
Yes, and Steve, you write about this in your book as well. I'm curious to hear your perspective of how negotiations have evolved. And I'm not going to call out any specific generations, but I've just heard some really, really fun stories over the past 12 months. I'm curious your perspective, Steve.
Again, I think it's nothing that you are formally taught. So if you're feeling self-conscious about this or anxious, that's not your fault. To me, that should be core curriculum in undergraduate, if not high school, because you're going to have to advocate for yourself all the time as you go through this professional life of yours. If I hire 10 people and only one of them tries to negotiate their salary, that one's getting my most important project. Because I know if I can't trust someone to advocate for themselves, I can't trust them to advocate on behalf of my organization. So there are a couple of books I love in this space. Getting to Yes is considered a classic. Never Split the Difference is another great perspective on this. My book, The Job Closer, I try to really condense the best of both of those worlds. But my recommendation is view the person with whom you're negotiating as a partner in this. Be authentic, share your reasons for wanting a larger salary or why you need a bigger signing bonus. But don't worry about finding perfect numbers. If you found out the exact number of the person before you made in that role, there's nothing that says that company has to honor it. So I think a lot of people wear themselves out trying to find the right number that the person before them made and not enough in getting comfortable advocating for themselves along the way.
Yeah, I wish I was on Twitter right now, Steve, because you just dropped a jewel. If you can't advocate for yourself, how can I expect you to advocate for my company? I wish I had a horn I could just go right now, because that's just powerful. Let's get to this question right here. I'm going to let whoever wants to take it. It's a really, really important question. Deals with, I think, ageism that takes place. It's real. So whoever wants to take this, take it. What's the best way to overcome the age obstacle? If you're retirement age, but still love your work, how do you not let age keep you from seeming competitive? Who would like to take that?
I'll just jump in. It's an asset, and you have the wrong mentality going into it. You're already lost in whatever conversation you're entering. Like having the experience and the perspective and the life, and again, the context. What have you lived through? What have you experienced? That's so valuable. And so it's the mindset of like you have leverage going into that dialogue. You're bringing to the table perspectives that others don't necessarily share or have. That's an asset. And so it's about framing it, positioning it, and that's a valuable thing that you can bring to any organization. And so, but I think a lot of that is getting into the right mindset as you enter into that dialogue. And I think a lot of the work that Kirk's talking about, that's value that you're bringing to the table. And so I would never go into it with the mindset of like, that's going to prevent me from something. It's like, no, you're giving them something. You're giving them an asset that they need to value and pay up for. And when going back to the negotiations, you got leverage in that conversation. And so I would flip it.
Beautiful, thank you. Go ahead, please, Katherine.
Energy. Oh, sorry, Antonio. I think it's the importance of bringing energy to the interview, energy to the job, that you're looking forward to this and that you have kept up in your field. And so you're ready to hit the ground running just the way anyone else would be.
Great answer. Thank you all for answering that. I've heard that question a lot over the years, and I think that's extremely helpful. I want to come to you for a quick second, Porter, and this is a really important question and something I don't think we talk about enough, and this is something I've experienced myself. What is your advice to someone who is the only person of color on their team or in the room? And sometimes even when you're the only person of color in the room, it's in the room of who you're being interviewed by. When you don't see anyone that looks like you. And I've experienced that myself in my life, in my broadcasting career and in many different regards. So your advice for that's the person that comes in and they realize I'm the only one that looks like me that's interviewing for this position. The people interviewing me aren't representative of me either.
Yeah, so it happens to me every single day of my life still. And it's one of those things where it goes back to what I was just saying. Your difference is valuable. It's an asset. And there's a thing called the spotlight effect, where find yourself to be the only person in the room in a situation. And if that room kind of like focuses on you, it literally feels like there's a spotlight on you. And when that happens, like, what do you do? Do you cramp up and it's fearful? Do you have that sense of nervousness, or do you shine in it? And can you leverage that spotlight to share unique perspectives and insights? And so if you find yourself, what I constantly remind myself as when I find myself being the only, I know that I know something that everybody else doesn't know. And so I'm going to bring that to the table. And that's what makes me valuable. I have a different perspective, experiences, context, the things I've been hitting on all night. And so it's stepping into that mindset of it being something that you have that others don't have. And so therefore you have leverage in that dialogue.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Kirk, please.
Just real quick, and I wrote about this in the book, it's your superpower. You want to look at whatever your only is, what makes you unique and different. That's your superpower. And if you can recognize that, you can harness it.
Great, thank you. And we're getting ready to wind down on time. It's like already 58 minutes in. This is going by, I don't know about for you all, but this is going by extremely fast for me. And that means that I'm having a lot of fun. What I want to do right now is for all of you, just give you an opportunity to share some final words. Maybe some encouragement or some advice you have for folks that are watching here tonight. Maybe folks are going to watch a little bit later. We all, I don't need to say that the past year has been extremely challenging. So many people have lost jobs or have had hours cut back. We have young college graduates, maybe not even folks who chose to go to college, that are entering a job market that has proved to be extremely challenging for them right now. It's not what they thought it was going to be. No one expected this. So I know this is a bit open-ended, but I just love it. I'll start with you, Steve. If there are any words of wisdom or encouragement that you could provide to folks right now as we get ready to wind down.
Yeah, really just don't get overwhelmed. There's something called the paradox of choice out there by Barry Schwartz. He identified the more options you're given, the harder it is to actually make a decision. And there's so much information out there. It's easier to get overwhelmed and do nothing. But find an alternative to applying to online job postings. You kind of know you're not going to hear back, but you do it anyway. And every time you do it, it's 15 minutes and a shred of your soul. And you only have a finite amount of spare time and shreds of your soul to throw at this process. Save it from that. Diversify. Don't just do online job postings. Get out there and learn from people whose work you admire or people who you think would never talk to you, and you'd be surprised how often they will, just because it's nice to talk positively about yourself when someone asks you why you're so good at what you do. So don't feel overwhelmed. Find scripts or recipes that you trust and just start asking smart people why they're so smart.
Beautiful. Porter, we'll come to you. Final thoughts for our viewers.
I would say two things. One would be define success. I think oftentimes we don't think about that enough. As I was going through my thought process in terms of what do I want to do, what do I feel like I'm called to do, it was the first time where I defined success for myself, because working in finance was successful for everybody else I knew, and everybody thought I was successful, but I didn't feel that. And so I now, and since then, have defined success as just pursuing towards my potential. And if I can do that, I feel successful. And that's, how I've been able to define it for myself. So as you are exploring these opportunities, literally take the time and define it. And I think that will help guide you. And then the second thing is that it all works out. It all works out. And just roll with the punches and kind of keep going through it and do the right things, put yourself in the right position, be authentic, be kind. And the world works for you in ways that are unimaginable. But just keep going, and it'll be good.
Beautiful. I love that. Let's come down to you, Kirk, for your parting words.
I would say don't judge yourself against anyone else or anyone else's timeline, and make sure that you're really wrapping your arms around the value that you bring to the world of work, you uniquely bring, and that will fuel you to exactly where you need to go. you've already got everything that you need to be successful.
What a beautiful reminder of not judging ourselves based on someone else's timeline. That goes back to what Porter said about success. Beautiful. And Katherine, last but not least,
Sure.
in Nashville, Tennessee.
Absolutely. You know, there's no mistakes if you learn. And so you take what you learn from each experience, and it's a marathon, this whole career building process. It's not a sprint. So you try what you think is going to work. You look at whatever first job or second job you have, figure out, what do I like the most about it? Where can I find a job that I can do more of that and less of the stuff I don't like? And then you move to that. And then you just keep repeating that over and over until you get to this point of where you're really happy with what you're doing.
Oh, wow. All those words right there. I know we're talking about jobs and we got really practical, we got tactical, but one thing I didn't expect was the level of encouragement that I hope everyone received out of this. I'm feeling really empowered right now. I'm feeling really inspired. All these folks right here have amazing books. Steve's book comes out super soon. The Job Closer. Of course, Let Them See You by Porter Broswell is available. We got Finding Work You Love by Kirk Snyder. I'm hoping to get all these autographs sometime in the near future. And this is one of Katherine's books. What Color is Your Parachute? Job Hunter's Workbook. Those links are available. I invite all of you to go support these amazing authors, check out their work, follow them on social media. I'm sure they'll greatly appreciate it. Porter Broswell, I can't thank you enough. Steve Dalton, Kirk Snyder, Katherine Brooks, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone out there for tuning in, for watching, for your questions. I firmly believe that the best thing to happen to you has not happened yet. We wish you nothing but success in your work, in your career. Go out there and get them.